Down the Dark Lane, 3 Thrillers from the Motel by Ned Dahan, the audiobook, made available on BlackBoxOnlineRadio. Please like and subscribe, and consider supporting this channel at BuyMeACoffee.com, BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNed88. Green Green Charlie. Why would Emil Osmond be staying at the same motel with people that he was trying to catch in the act, and not be alert enough to catch them in the act? And these European criminals, Jane carried on. I just don't believe for a second they're real. They're pushing this act that they're professionals, or they were before they died, but they acted like they were just making all this up. I don't doubt that they're up to something, but this isn't something like murder or fraud. It's probably one of those crimes that doesn't require intelligence. I don't really know, I had to admit once again. Well, keep thinking, Charlie, she encouraged me. Up until now, you've been trying to solve a puzzle using the wrong pieces. Turn here, I pointed to the small drive as Jane approached the spot to turn onto the road where I had last seen Jamie. Show me the spot where you last saw her, Jane planned. I was not completely sure, but there was something that was making sense about Osmond and the Danes. Jane may or may not have been on the right track when she thought they were fakes, but if they weren't who they said they were, then who were they? All we knew at this time was that Jamie was gone, and someone had taken her. She could have been in the tool shed, but she could have also been anywhere in the county by now. And just like that, the guilt began to pour onto me like winter. It felt like an ice storm. But I had done the right thing, hadn't I? I was not able to call an ambulance for Amelia, but I had tried, and that was more than Jamie had done. If I had stayed by Jamie's side, Amelia may or may not have lived. I really didn't know what to do at the time, but why did I feel so pathetic? As I tried to piece together the pieces to the new puzzle, we darted around the twists and turns of the road. This was the first time I had been on the road, when I had been a passenger and I wasn't driving. I really started to feel carsick. It was a mix of random turns. The guilt for ditching Jamie, the guilt for what I had done in front of Amelia, the guilt for even contemplating killing Osmond, and just realizing how bizarre things had turned out. What was really going on here? Queen's Rock was not even a dot on the map, so why was it causing so much trouble? What did I know at this point? There were 5 Nordic individuals who were obviously criminals of some kind, but Jane denied the idea that they were professionals, and that they were who they said they were. The more I thought about it, the less I thought they were the murdering kind. Osmond's story suddenly made less and less sense. Also, what she had said about Osmond was something that I could understand. If someone was tracking the every move of a group of criminals, he would not have been very good at his job if he let them sneak a dead body through a motel window when he was only a few doors down. I believed Osmond's every word. I mean, it was not so hard to follow what he was saying, considering I had seen him shoot 2 Danes in front of me just to save my sorry life. But the more I thought about him, the more things seemed bizarre. Nothing made sense at this point, but there was no way to make this senseless plan clear until we calculated something. Osmond was here for a reason, and I had to look at what I knew for certain. Number 1, I had found a body in the Green Greens motel. Number 2, Jamie Laurent was missing, and most definitely she was tied up somewhere. Number 3, Emil Osmond had killed 2 of the Danes. Number 4, Amelia Olsen had wrecked her car, and she was reportedly in the hospital. Those were the things I knew. These were the things I wanted to know. Number 1, who had dumped the body in the motel? Number 2, who really was Emil Osmond? Number 3, who were these Danish people and Amelia? And number 4, where could we find Jamie? There was that age-old expression of back to square one, and that is how I felt. I watched Jane pull the car up to the spot where Amelia had wrecked her car. The car that Jane was driving was identical to Amelia's, a black Pontiac Bonneville. Jane parked, and I was outside the car in a heartbeat. There must have been something there that could give us an idea about where Jamie was. And of course next we were going to search the shed where I had been tied up. I was still not sure how that happened. All I remembered was knocking on the door to a mobile home, and then the next thing I knew my head was using a paint can as a pillow and a garden rake as a cushion seat, not to mention the blood that was coming from the back of my skull. I hadn't even put a bandage on the wound, but for some reason it felt okay. That was something that I would regret later, but I was not focused on that right now. "Here," Jane called to me, and I turned. Jane removed an item from her purse. Thank goodness she had it in her hands when Hardface and Softface abducted us. In her hand was a tiny little flashlight, smaller than the one the dead Danish man had shined in my face. "You'll see more with this on," Jane advised me. She tossed me the light. "What are you going to use?" I asked. "It's not your job to worry about me, Charlie," she dictated. I turned on the tiny little reading flashlight. I had been watching some type of cartoon once that said you could tell that tracks were fresh if the edges were moist, but I couldn't even remember where that was from. I was able to see the tracks clearly. I was standing right in front of the area where I had parked Little Jack's truck, and it showed where I had sped off from the dirty shoulder onto the road. I walked back over to where Amelia had wrecked, and Jane and I scoured the area at the same time. It would have helped if I knew what I needed to find. "Here," Jane got my attention. "Give me the light. Look at this." I handed the tiny flashlight over to Jane. "Do you see that?" she asked me. It didn't take a wilderness expert to see footprints in the dusty, dirty soil. "That's Jamie's shoe," Jane explained. "It looks like she was standing here and then she fell. Naturally, she got back up. Well, that's bizarre." I hoped she wouldn't notice I had temporarily done some rolling around with Jamie. "Look, Charlie," Jane pointed to the direction of the tracks. "The ground is a mess in some parts, but look at where these footprints lead." Jane showered the light down on what she determined to be Jamie's tracks, and I was also surprised to see that instead of moving along the road, they went straight into the thicket and the trees, which surrounded the crash site. "Why would she go into the forest?" I asked Jane. If she had the answer, she would have shared it. If I had the answer, I would have tattooed it on Jane's palm, but I had nothing to say as well. "What about the trailer down the road?" I mentioned to Jane as I saw her take a step toward the trees. "I know for a fact that the 2 Danish guys that Osmond killed were in that trailer." "Jamie's tracks lead this way," Jane persisted. "If we follow them, we will find what we need one way or another. The place you mentioned is too much of a long shot. I might know something." I was awful when it came to planning and making these kind of decisions, so I began to follow Jane through the trees, with possibly the world's smallest flashlight to guide me. Chapter 21. "Stop," Jane ordered, and I was no one to disobey. Jane's eyes were fixed on something near the ground, and she knelt down over the dirt. "What do you see?" I asked her. "Nothing," she replied. "The tracks stop here." Jane moved the flashlight around the area, and she then moved it back to its original position. "The tracks just stop," she reiterated. "But over here there are 2 sets of other tracks. They're moving around a lot. It's bizarre. They were not just walking through." "The dirt looks different," I commented. And it was true. The dirt everywhere was a dark brown, but this one was just a little shade lighter. "Jamie," gasped Jane. The flashlight fell to the ground, and Jane began clawing at the dirt, and I began to do the same because I felt that Jane and I had the same bad idea. We first began scraping away the top layers of dirt, and then we started scooping the dirt away in larger chunks. Suddenly, I stopped. "What is it?" Jane asked me. I looked down at the area, and I knew that I had felt something metal. It was indeed metal, and it was large. I so hoped it was not what I thought. Jane and I kept moving the layers of loose dirt, and it was clear that it was a large metal box just over 5.5 feet long and about 2 feet wide. "No," Jane grimaced. Her voice felt almost lifeless. "Here," I stopped Jane. Figured there was enough dirt cleared away off of the box for me to open it. There were 3 metal latches on the side, and I flicked each one of them. They all popped up without any stiffness at all. Then I opened the box, and we stared inside. Chapter 22. More than anything, I had expected to find Jamie inside, but this was almost worse. Inside the box was only a single little card. It was a standard 3x5 index card, which read, "If you wanted to find the girl, I beat you to it. E.O." Emil Osmond? Jane read the card after she snatched it from me. What does this mean, Charlie? What does this mean? I had no idea. I don't know, Jane, I admitted. Don't tell me that, she virtually squealed. He has Jamie. Is he saying that he has Jamie? I wanted to confirm it, but I had no idea what to say. The two Danes had shown us a picture of Jamie when that she was tied up, and now Emil Osmond had left a note which stated that he knew where Jamie was. The only thing that I could piece together was that the Danes had planted Jamie's body in the metal box, and Emil Osmond had taken her somewhere else. Osmond had shown up randomly after he shot the two people down by the trailer, which was nearby. While I had been unconscious and tied up, the two men at the trailer must have found Jamie and left her inside the metal box, buried her alive. Then before Osmond came to my rescue, he must have moved Jamie. But how did he get here? Where could he have taken her? And why did he drive me back to the town? None of this made any sense at all. But there was one thing that was completely known. Jamie was still missing, and if Osmond was in town without a vehicle that I knew of, Jamie had to be somewhere nearby. Jane looked like she was on the verge of having a panic attack, and I put my hands on her shoulders. Jane, it's not over, I tried to console her. Jamie must be nearby. That I'm almost sure of. I know it's hard, but can you look at the tracks? Is there anything that you can see about where they might lead? Jane took several deep breaths. She did not seem like the same woman who had bragged about killing a man and dumping his body under a layer of concrete. Meanwhile, Emil Osmond was becoming the most capricious factor in my life. First he came out of nowhere, rescued me from Danish lunatics. Then I ended up agreeing to take his life to save Jamie's, although I knew I wasn't actually going to kill him. But now he was taunting Jane. I was with Jane now, and Osmond had entrapped Jamie somewhere. Also, he claimed that he wanted reward money for Jane's capture, but Jane had almost convinced me that Osmond was no bounty hunter, or collection specialist, as he called it. If he wasn't, then what was he? I'm so disappointed to see you here. His voice came across the trees. Why did it have to be Osmond's voice? Chapter 23. You were out of it, Charlie, Osmond called to me. I couldn't see him yet, but he was somewhere in the trees. Immediately Jane reached for the gun, but then Osmond appeared before us from the tree line, armed and ready. Jane did not get a shot off, but she held up her 9mm. He did not have his .22 pistol. Instead, he was holding a rifle, or maybe a shotgun. I really couldn't tell in the darkness. Drop your weapon, he instructed. Tell me where Jamie is, Jane ordered. Drop your weapon, or I'll kill Charlie. Osmond changed his instructions. I'll put a bullet in him, and then you'll put a bullet in me, and then I'll put a bullet in you, and you'll never see your granddaughter again. My hands were in the air, and I was not in the mood to be shot tonight, but Jane was relentless to set her gun down. Tell me where Jamie is, Jane repeated. You're not going to scare me, Mrs. Laurent, Osmond almost laughed. I've already won the battle and the war, so why don't you keep yourself and Mr. Charles from losing any more blood? Now put down your weapon, and I do not want to kill you, but as Charlie can verify, I am easily capable of ending a human life if necessary, so please put down your weapon. Jane's hands were still on the 9mm, and she was refusing to drop it. From my point of view, Osmond's weapon was directed at me. I would have done anything to change that part of the equation. He's not going to kill you, I said to Jane. I know that. Jane was one step ahead of me. At least he won't kill me like this. But you, on the other hand, that he'll do easily. Now she's a smart woman, Charlie, chuckled Osmond. Now why don't you tell her what I want? I don't know, I said. Yes, you do, Osmond urged. I told you what I want from her, so now you'll tell her what I want. You weren't telling the truth. I hoped I was right. He told me what you claimed to be, Jane shouted at Osmond. You're no bounty hunter. These other Europeans aren't hardened criminals either. So why don't you just stop feeding us this bullshit and tell us what's going on? You think I'm not a collection specialist? Osmond taunted Jane. Well, I know for a fact that the police department is offering a reward for the location of the remains of a man named Christopher Mounds. I think you know where to find them." Jane tensed a little. Her hands were still on the trigger, but now she knew that Osmond knew too much about what she had done. "I had nothing to do with that, Jane," I tried to reassure her, but I didn't think she heard me. "I didn't expect to find Charlie here," Osmond continued. "You know, he volunteered to help me turn you in." "I would have done the same thing if I were him," Jane defended me surprisingly. "Any sensible person would have turned me in after what I said to him." Thankfully, she did not mention anything about me making the plan to kill Osmond. After all, I wasn't really going to do it. I had just been stalling for time. "Charlie, you were rather stupid," he insulted me. "If you had just stayed in Queen's Rock after we arrived, you would not be a part of this." What he said was true, but it was my fault that Jamie had been taken. I had done enough standing back. Also, despite my focus on Osmond, how did the Danes get a hand on her and lock her in the box in the first place? Well, how wasn't the right question. It was more like, why would they lock her in a metal box of all places, bury her alive? "You want to know while you're still alive?" Osmond kept up with his ridicule. "I'm going to offer you a deal. I turn you in, Jane, and I spare your granddaughter's life, and Charlie's as well, for that matter." Who was Osmond? I had some correcting to do. Osmond was truthful when he said that he wanted the money for Jane's capture or the discovery of this Christopher Mounds, the body that Jane claimed she had buried under the concrete years ago. His line about the Danes being serial murderers that rob people was still a little bit hard to believe. The other thing that I was sure of was that Osmond had the gun pointed at me, and I was staring down the barrel. Osmond had to have been the link to all of this, but how did it fit together? "Who are these Danish people?" I asked Osmond. It was probably pointless to prod him with questions, but I tried anyway. "They're exactly who I told you they were." Osmond stood by his response. "No, they're not," I countered. My lips almost formed into a smile, and I was hoping that Osmond wouldn't shoot me for laughing at him. "I saved your life, you idiot!" he roared at me. "If it weren't for me, you'd be dead. Have you forgotten that? You were the one who walked right back into this." In all reality, Osmond hadn't necessarily saved my life. He had rescued me, but it was not guaranteed that I would have been dead without his intervention. "Who are these people?" I asked again. "Why were you following them?" "I hope this is right, Charlie," Jane called over to me as she lowered her gun. I could not believe that she put the gun down. Then it fell from her hands onto the ground. I looked at Osmond, and he still held his gun high and pointed toward me. "I didn't want this to happen," he told me without a shred of sincerity. Why had Jane dropped the gun? I only prayed that she had a plan to get us out of this, because I sure as hell did not have one. Chapter 24. The walk through the forest was dark and solemn. The air was clear, but it was freezing, and now the dew was seriously beginning to soak my pants and shoes. It was so weird that, while I was held up at gunpoint, I still cared about little things like that. All the events of the day were just a blur in my mind. They were like a mosaic or maybe a collage of ridiculousness. There were so many things that had no answers anywhere in sight. Who really was Osmond, and where were we going? And the question that had been nagging at me for the longest time: how did that body get into the Green Greens motel? But in all of this mess, there was still one question we had to have the answer to. Why did Jamie go into the forest after I left her? That question may have been the most important of all. Before us was a tiny little shack in the darkness, and then another gunshot was heard across the trees. Osmond fell to the ground and grabbed his arm. Then Jane rolled over and grabbed Osmond's gun, and in a split second she was standing over him with the barrel pointed down upon his wounded body. Blood was pouring out of Osmond's arm, and it made Jane smile. "Impossible! Impossible!" Osmond was shrieking. "You are an idiot," Jane growled. Then the door to the shack swung open, and from there emerged a man in a black and yellow checkered shirt. He was wearing very large, thick glasses, and his hair was a long, flowing mess. "Withers?" I identified him. He was one of the people that Little Jack had talked about, and Little Jack's description had been perfect. "It sounds like I'm more well-known than I thought," Withers confirmed his identity. "You knew he was here," I said to Jane. "Why didn't you just tell me?" "I thought someone might be listening," she replied, "and I was right." "Why didn't you just kill us when we had the chance, Osmond? We were right in front of you." I had seen Osmond shoot down 2 people in a heartbeat. There must have been a reason why he had been so hesitant. "Why did you do it?" Jane kept asking. "I will never tell you anything," laughed Osmond. "Go ahead, point those guns at me as much as you want, but if you kill me, you'll lose your only chance to see that blonde, filthy, whorish rat again." "Before you decide to kill him," I began, "what are you doing here, Mr. Withers?" "What am I doing here?" he repeated. "Well, what are you doing here? It's not every day that someone walks up here held at gunpoint." "He's an arms dealer, Charlie," Jane informed me. "Sort of," Withers nodded. "He was a classmate of Jamie's during high school," Jane explained. "She called me up this evening," Withers went on. "I was enjoying my comfortable free room at the Holiday Inn when Jamie called. She said something important had come up and she needed my services. I had 2 32s waiting for her, but she never showed. I take it this dirtbag had something to do with it?" "But why were you at the motel?" Withers laughed without lowering his rifle. "Look where it is," he explained. "It's in the middle of nowhere, just another place to do business. Normally I head up to the motel in Fredericksburg, but tonight I decided to come back to the motel in Queens Rock. It's been a couple of years. It has a different owner now." "Are you finished with your little catch-up stories?" Osmond mocked us. By now I was aware of a lot more things. It was obvious that Osmond's story about the Danes and Amelia Olsen being serial murderers was fake. There was no doubt in my mind that Osmond knew who had left the body in the Green Greens motel. However, room number 1 was the closest room from the motel office. Who other than Osmond could have left the body there? There was no other reason for him to cook up the story about the Danes and their plans. Osmond had to have been the person who had left the body in the Green Greens. "Why did you leave the body there?" There was no response from Osmond, but he knew. The more silence he gave, the more I felt something. My original thought was, it had been a bad sexual encounter gone wrong. I quickly dismissed that because it seemed so silly, and it seemed more likely that it was the result of a torture act. But I had been naive in my judgment. If he had wanted to commit a crime, the Green Greens was perfect. "You are a pervert," I said to Osmond. Now he rolled over and looked to me. "What?" Jane asked me, without looking at me. "Who was that man in the Green Greens?" I asked him. "We all know you killed him. You're the only person who had enough time to leave the body there. But now we know why. You killed him and then you brought him in the motel because you were gonna touch the body in some kind of weird sex way. I don't know what you wanted to do, but I know that you're a pervert." I could not believe that I had just said that. I could not believe that this was true, but now the piece had finally fallen into place. "You brought the body into the motel," I kept on going.